you're about to get separated or about to go to mediation or trying to figure out what your property settlement should be, and at the same time trying to figure out where you're going to live, whether you should keep the house, sell the house, rent the house, buy your ex-partner out of the house, or consider things like rentvesting. Well, today's episode will be perfect for you because today we have Pedro Marin Ramirez from Marin Wealth. Welcome, Pedro.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here again. I'm so excited.
And of course, we've got Mum, Lynn Galvin, a family law specialist here as well.
Hello, Laura. Hello, Pedro. Hello, everyone.
So today we are really going to be exploring making your property decisions aligned with financial stuff as well as property considerations that you may not have thought about yet. And a lot of people don't have the opportunity to speak to a financial planner and they don't have an opportunity to speak to a lawyer before making some of these decisions. Now, whilst we expect that every single one of you will see a financial planner and see a family lawyer, this is an education discussion about possible risks and potential outcomes of decisions that people may make when exploring what are you going to do with the property? Are you going to keep it or sell it or move on? So let's get to the jingle and then we'll get started.
Hello, I'm Laura Furiosi, divorced mother of 3, and I'm here with my mother, Lynette Galvin, with 35 years experience in family law. You're listening to the Divorce Course podcast. Through our candid discussions, we hope to help you through your divorce or de facto separation. We will be answering the most commonly asked questions and covering the stages and steps that you will face on your way to freedom.
So thank you, Pedro, for coming along. We really appreciate it.
I hope that everyone who's listening to this knows that I'm number one fan. And both ways, the number one fan and the number one fan of all.
Yes.
That's brilliant.
That's a lot of fanning. And you have actually been with the Divorce Course podcast since quite early on. We've done a couple of episodes with you back in 2020. You've been around and you've been helping a lot of our listeners, and we've had you on webinars, we've had you in Q&As, and we're really grateful that we've got you today because we know that you're busy with your clients. So thank you, Pedro.
My pleasure. I'm just going to repeat, number one fan.
Now, was there any disclaimer you wanted to say before we got started, Pedro?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who is listening to this, I don't know who you are. I don't know your personal circumstances. I don't know nothing about you. So please treat these as just general information only. This is not personal advice by any means. And if you indeed require financial advice or financial guidance, please see someone that you trust and you can find. Unfortunately, that, like Laura mentioned, there's not many of us in society at the moment, but definitely try to reach out to anyone who can guide you if your situation is extremely complex or if you generally don't know what to do.
So let's get into it. So let's imagine one of our listeners today, she's trying to figure out whether to keep the house. And let's be fair, a lot of people listening want to keep the house because it's where you've lived, it's where your kids probably are living. It's just the easiest option mentally to stay in the house. So Pedro, and then Mum, we're going to get to you in a minute. What are some considerations you would say for people to consider if you were meeting someone about keeping the family home when it comes to their property settlement?
I think the first, unfortunately, we are financial planners, but we also are, I would call us PT of sentiment. In this case, we usually deal with greed and fear. Generally, those are the two sentiments we tend to manage for clients. In this particular case, the sentiment we generally have to think of is, are you biased towards your home? Because you have your memories, you have your views, you have your location, your customs, and there's quite a lot of bias from you to think this is the place I need. Us, we're non-biased. We just see the numbers, we see what is in your best interest and have absolutely no interest whatsoever, whether you live there or whether you live in a certain area. So the first thing is try it as much as you can. It's very difficult. Usually a third party does it for you. Remove your personal bias towards the asset. Second of all would be the actual sustainability of the asset. Can you fund that in the future? Because mostly when there are two, and that's what the bank will see, your two incomes, that's how much you borrow based on two incomes and your serviceability and how much can you sustain if there's a market or an increase in interest rates. The banks does all those, they do all that criteria for you. But when it's just one, which is what probably obviously you're considering, That's a different game. That's a different calculation. Those are different things. So how much can you borrow will be the first. I will second in this instance. How much can I borrow? Can I actually survive on that? Because there are different banks that lend you differently. You will be surprised on how much some banks can lend you versus others. It's based on the risk acceptance, based on where you live, the market considerations, and there's a million other aspects that banks take before they lend to you. So some obviously will lend you more, and most people go, okay, I'll take the more, please, but not really consider the reality of borrowing your max. You can be financially strained. Obviously your lifestyle can change. There could not be room for emergencies. So there's quite a few things that you have to foresee. But for us, as part of the planning is, can you have a buffer for emergencies? What happens if there's an emergency? How much do you have left after the settlement? So there's quite a few things before even considering accepting the house. Serviceability is number one. How much can you borrow is number two. Remove your personal bias towards the house and see if indeed this is your best shot at having a great life. I think I was going to mention this in our website and not just our website, it could be any website really. There's plenty of free stuff that will give you a number of what I've just mentioned. So if you go to marinwealth.com today and basically go to calculators, you can actually have a crack at see how much can I borrow? And then from there, you can go, how much will that cost me? So you can, very general, obviously, but it gives you an indication, will that loan will be for me? Can I sustain that?
Brilliant. So the calculators you can definitely go check out on Pedro on marinwealth.com. We'll put the links in the show notes. That is a lot of things to consider there. And it's running the numbers. Mum, is it likely for a court to give one person the house and all the other assets to the other person? Does that happen often?
It used to happen all the time before we could divide superannuation, but it still happens from time to time. Particularly, it depends how bonded a person is to their super or how bonded they are to the house. But I think what Pedro was talking about was can you afford to keep it? I will always talk it in a different way, because I think a lot of women in particular have other motives as well for keeping the house. The number of times you hear, oh, my daughter's in year 11 or my son's just starting high school. So they really want to try and not upset the world more than they should. But sure, they have an emotional attachment sometimes to the house. And I've always sent them off on a weekend to go and see open houses. And that seems to help. They go and look at these little manageable places, and then they can see their way forward. But as for serviceability, my test for them used to be, well, if you do buy the house, what are you going to do if your washing machine fails or you have to get a new fridge? How are you going to live? And if you have to sell it in the year or two after, you're going to be hit with all of the costs of a sale yourself instead of sharing them with your ex. And Laura, I think you know that the law has changed recently, like a week ago. And the court, one of the things the court is looking at is the care of a child and whether the person needs to provide appropriate housing for the child, which indicates to us that the court may be even more inclined to give the house to someone, even if it's a little bit more than their share, if it means they can keep the children in that home. So that's Section 79 5F for people who want to look at it. And that's a brand new section, that keeping the house if you want to provide appropriate housing. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see, but you need to make sure you can afford it before you ask for it.
Yeah. So some people may sit down with their financial planner, or they might go jump on your website, Pedro, and have a look at the calculators and figure out, oh, wait, I can't actually afford to keep the house, even if there's an uptick for property, because they're the ones that are going to keep the children. And to those people who are listening, just be aware we do have 2 other episodes. One's called I Really, Really, Really Want to Keep the House, and the other one's called Out of Box Ideas on How to Keep the House. But if none of that works, and they may have to consider selling it to their ex or selling it just to get the cash in. Are there any things people need to be aware of when we're thinking of selling their property for property settlement as opposed to staying in it?
Yeah, so this is more market consideration. So we are in a really healthy cycle with property. So it takes, on average, will take very little to sell, or not as long as it used to. So that could change in a dime. So it could be market conditions can change. It could be a recession around the corner, and then people are not willing to buy your property very quickly. So that's one. The second thing is you always have to consider negotiation. Where do you stand? Do you have the power of time? That's significant because you can see the vultures coming around your house thinking this is a divorce. This is basically needs to be on the market because you cannot service it because you're on your own. You lose a lot of the negotiation power. Even though I'm not a real estate agent, this has nothing to do with financial planning. It's mostly things that you need to consider. Am I going to buy this as a fire sale, or do I have the time to sell this and basically get more people into it? Look at my options around what offers come in. And that's one thing you have to be very aware. That's the biggest cost I would foresee in someone selling an asset, that if you have to sell it in very quickly and basically what the rest will be your marketing components, your agent's fees, do your due diligence, your homework, your conveyancer's fees, if there's any, how much is left after. So that's probably the main thing when selling your home, that you have to be aware of the time, how much time you'll have left after.
Okay. And so, Mum, can people get a property settlement saying they're going to sell the house? And are there problems with that?
Yes, you can. You can always make a consent order that includes clauses about selling the house, right? And there aren't really problems with that as long as both parties are prepared to sign all the documents and do the things. But sometimes it's really hard if you've got a non-cooperative ex, particularly if you've got orders that say, for instance, that I'm going to get 80%, Pedro's going to get 20% of the property. He's disinclined to sell, or more inclined to sell it cheap just to cause trouble for the other person. So there's that. And also too, if you make plans to sell the house, and even if you agree, someone's usually living in there leading up to sale. And then you've got to rely on them to do the old rush around on open house days, all that stuff.
So can I ask, and a lot of people ask this, I can't get divorced and I can't do a property settlement yet because I've got to sell the house first.
Yeah.
So people don't have to sell the house first?
No, you can do it. You can say that you're going to sell the house, and you can set out who the real estate agents are and all of that, and have a formula for how you're going to distribute the value. And there's a few tricks with that. One is make sure that your percentage isn't going to drop too much, or the dollar figure is going to drop dramatically if you reduce the house, or watch out that the other person hasn't asked for a fixed sum and you get the rest, and then the house drops down.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
well, and Pedro, if people have sold their houses, and a lot of people do, they go, we're getting a divorce, we're selling the house, and they haven't seen a lawyer, they haven't figured out property settlement. They just end up with this massive lump sum of money just sitting there while they then fight for the next 2-3 years. I hope this isn't happening to someone listening. What should people be doing with that lump sum of money?
First of all, major variable that I tell people about cash is it will be the exact same today, 2 years from now, and 3 years from now. So that's a big variable. If you need to pay out, you need to have some money doesn't belong to you. It is costing you, obviously, if you most likely, real terms, if you're making 4% in the bank and the inflation rate of the year is 5%, you're losing 1% of your purchasing power per year. So it is costing you money to keep it doing nothing. I do explain the word, or what you actually explain is called opportunity cost. So the opportunity of not doing something will cost you something. Now, that's where I would ask someone, what are your financial commitments in the next 3 years? What is the percentage that you deem, or your lawyer deems, that the settlement will be? And you kind of work your way around that. Obviously, it's not 100%. 100% is after settlement, because you know the exact number or separation of the assets. But knowing your financial commitments will tell us what to do with those funds. If you invest it and it goes down by half, and then you actually have to come up with money, you may lose everything. Whereas obviously cash costs you, but the number is there at time of whatever time that may be. So if it's 5 years, unfortunately, your money goes backwards, but the number is reliable. So whatever combination of depends on the individual circumstances.
Okay, so Mal, what have you got to say about those people who have sold the house and they've got this big lump sum of money? They haven't got property settlement yet.
Okay, I think first of all, thank you, lucky stars, if all of that money is still there and in someone's trust account, because if you don't move quickly, the purchasers will give you one check each for half the amount, and then you're in a little bit of trouble if you might be entitled to 60%, for instance. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I agree with Pedro that getting your foot back in the market, if you sell a property, you need to buy again in the same market. And I think our listeners will know they're not probably going to get the big house, but they'll buy something that suits their new style of life. And if you buy it in the same market, you're okay and you don't suffer that loss of cash. Thankfully, the court these days is more inclined to make orders releasing some of those funds. Usually, say you had 600,000, they might give your ex 200 and you 300 or 200 each just to get started. That might give you a deposit on the house so that they're not locked up, because in solicitors' trust accounts, they don't make any money. And so that's the worry I have with people. Like, by all means, list the house, get it ready for sale, but somewhere you need to go and see a lawyer and put some position in place so that the money can be preserved somewhere.
Right. The other thing people think they can't do is buy a house before property settlement. So you're saying it's better that they do.
If they can.
And Pedro, you're saying they're better that they probably should if they can as well.
Well, yeah. So unfortunately, if you buy a house and then you need an actual cash or a liquid form of an asset, so either shares or whatever, you can't sell the door of the house. You can't sell a portion. You can rent, obviously, depending on your circumstances, the size of the house. You can rent a room, maybe get some cash flow out of it, but a big lump sum of cash, if required, that's obviously the big asterisk here is if you required extra. So imagine your divorce extends for several years. This is just the beginning. And then those several years, you have to then come up with a lump sum to pay your lawyers or even self-represent. You still need some form of liquidity. That's what I would be warned, or just be mindful before purchasing anything, because Lynn is absolutely correct. It doesn't matter what, we're in the same cycle. So if you buy, you're in the same cycle, but that's a big but.
Yeah.
If this drags and if it becomes expensive, imagine you then have to sell that property because you cannot afford it. And then it's a different cycle. It's, you'll get less or whatever that may be, or you have to sell it in a rush. Like I mentioned before, your time is your most precious asset when negotiating or selling an asset.
Yep, I absolutely agree. And I think too that if you buy a place and then you end up having to sell it, you're also up for the agent's fees. There's all by yourself. Whereas with the house, it was probably shared with your ex-partner, but this is all by yourself. So I think modest is the key, isn't it? Modest.
Yeah.
Get somewhere modest.
And I forgot to tell you, I also run this scenario with clients of the cost of selling and buying. Selling is the agent's fees, buying is your stamp duty, depending on the state in which you live. Sometimes I explain to them, this may cost you $200,000 just this exercise alone of buying and selling. So sometimes people don't consider those costs and say, I may as well keep it. I say, yes, but you cannot afford it. So you unfortunately have to consider this cost. You do not have 100. Imagine you have 600,000. The stamp duty alone could be 20. The sales or the property could be X. There could be quite a few costs hidden that you may not consider once you enter the market or want to enter the market. There's also a stamp duty calculator in our website.
If you're transferring the house from two people to one, pursuant to a court order or a consent order, in other words, it's after you've had your consent order and you're doing what it says, you won't have to pay stamp duty in any of the states if you fit within Section 90 of the Family Law Act. Because the beauty of the family court is it's a Commonwealth entity, Commonwealth government, and they're telling the states, no, you can't charge these poor beggars stamp duty when they're just at their worst possible time.
Spot on. And I think I add to that is that's part of our considerations. Look, this is how much it costs to buy and sell. If specifically what you just mentioned, if you keep the home, you save this much. Now there is a small print in there that law can change and it may change. Then imagine it's 10 years down the track and we have land tax. So that's the difference. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's like when you go to a doctor and says, this is the surgery, and these are the small risks that may happen in this surgery. Not 100%, but this is small print, and I can't say zero. And one of them is your legislation risk, that it changes in the future. And you now did consider that land tax will be part of your cost of owning a home.
So there are a lot of things to consider. And that's why it's really good to always go and see a financial planner before you make property decisions, because your lawyer may be saying, and no offense, Mum, but some lawyers may be saying, yes, just agree to sell your portion of the house, or yes, agree to buy their portion of the house. But if you haven't sat down and done the numbers, looked at your budget, looked at all the risks, look at all these other things that Pedro's been mentioning as well, really going in blind, and you may end up having to sell it 2 weeks after your property settlement and then incurring extra costs because you don't have the Commonwealth government giving you that extra little kick. So the other option then is for people to rent. And I know that we are in a housing crisis around Australia. So people can rent. And I have heard that a lot of people are choosing that option these days. A lot of our listeners are just selling their share, they're getting the money and they're renting. So Pedro, can you just talk through some things that you might explore with a client who walked in, who was getting a property settlement and their plan was to get a money chunk from their ex and then just rent?
Yeah, one of the worst you or any of the listeners might see very common in social media is called rentvesting. So what that means actually is that you rent where you want to live and you buy an investment property at the size that will help your cash flow. So when you rent a property, the bank sees it's different because they include the income that the property will be making, and therefore your serviceability increases. So it's a much easier example of bricks. This happens quite a bit now where we've got clients who have $2.5, $3 million debt that service it costs maybe $25,000 a month, whereas they can live in the same house for less than half, maybe a third or a fourth of that price. And what they do, they free up capital to then invest in other areas, still receiving an income, someone paying your loan, but you live in the area that you want at a discounted price. And the cost of maintaining the property is not on you, it's on the landlord. So those are things that it's not for everyone. And obviously Australia is a very property driven society.
We are.
Yes, obviously I am mindful of that. I'm very cultural aware, but it is something that is taking on quite a bit, especially around the schooling, what areas in your metropolitan states that you want to live in. So it is a very popular strategy, not saying for everyone, but that's some of the options. The risk of doing that, there's plenty of risks. I feel like a doctor every time explaining the surgery and the risk about the big risk is, again, another cycle. People forget that 6-7 years ago, there were no tenants. We were giving away a month for free in rent because we couldn't get someone to rent our properties. That could happen. I'm not saying it will, but it's all cyclical. It's just based on how many humans there are and how many properties there are. That could be decades from now. That could be months from now. Nobody really knows. So that's your first risk, actually renting and then buying a property, expecting an income and not receiving it. The second risk is your property where you rent, the landlord either moving in, selling it. So your movement, and specifically what you said in this particular case where we are not struggling, but it's not as simple to rent everywhere. That's the risk that you rely on making sure that where you're going to live and rent is forever or for a big chunk of time or whatever you deem. That's a big risk. And the other one is you buy an investment property and it's deemed uninhabitable. I've seen that. I've had clients have been through that. So you are now stuck with rent and a mortgage without any income from it. That can happen. So those are the risks, very low. Those are the risks of property surgery, I'm going to call it.
So, Mum, is there, as Pedro mentioned, some people, and we hear this a lot, there's listeners whose kids go to a really fancy private school and they're getting property settlement. They know they've got to sell the house. They've got to move somewhere else, but they kind of need to stay near the school. And I don't know, say the fancy ones in Melbourne, they've got to try and find somewhere close enough so the kids can keep going to school. Do the courts consider this at all, or can you move to a cheaper suburb?
I think the courts will consider everything for the best interests of the children and for property division, particularly that providing a house for the kids. But what I'd like to say to people listening today, before you factor that in as something that you really have to have, a house in that area, check with the school if they will relax those catchment rules because your kids are already there. And I've seen that happen over time with a number of people. They think they have to stay in the house, but when they finally go and talk to the school, they go, oh, no, that's fine.
Oh, okay. All right.
So check
that's
first.
good.
Yeah.
But what about those people who can't rent vest? They're really strapped. They just have to rent. There is no rent vesting. They're just renting. Are there any risks about just renting, Pedro, that you can think of?
Yeah, obviously the main risk is not having the property where you want to live forever. So you're relying on a third party for your housing. I've seen that happening where the landlord wishes to then live where you live and they give you 3 months notice or they won't renew your lease. So that's a big risk that we're talking, especially going through the trouble of wars. You wanted some sort of stability. That's a major risk I see. So do your due diligence very thorough. So if you can ask the real estate agent who owns the home, where do they live? Do they have any other properties? That may lower your chances of that happening. Because, for example, if it's an investment property for another, imagine someone overseas that would never come back here. That obviously is a big plus because you go, you know what? That's actually pretty good. The chances of that person living here are very slim because they need a visa, etc. So that's one. The other, when you rent, the big thing you have to, it's a must. You need a cash reserve, I guess an emergency fund, at least 3 to 6 months, especially when you do settlements. The first thing you can say, let me just change a car. Let me pay for this. Let me pay for that. And when you look around, there's nothing left. That's a big no-no. Obviously, always have your rely on at least 3 to 6 months. Imagine you going through a divorce and you lose your job and then now you're renting. That's a big, obviously, think about it when you're getting settlements. Just think about your reserve. How much can I sustain myself? Do I have family in Australia? Because those are things I always, when I was at uni, those are things I had at the top of my mind. If I can't work, I can't eat. And I remember my house being flooded in 2011. I have to live couch on because I didn't have family here. And back then there was just no governmental assistance for international students. So those are things that really you need to have a plan for an emergency and what are your options. There's plenty of help out there. There's absolutely a huge amount of entities that can provide assistance, but you're better off doing your own plan if you can.
It's heartbreaking for lawyers if we're working very hard to get our client everything we can for them so that they can be set up. And then to have happened has happened to me once, to find a female actually spent her entire amount on a Peter Brock Holden car.
Oh dear.
I lost sleep over this client. This was when I was quite young. And I'm thinking, what? So, yeah, if you've been in a financially controlled situation, you may think, oh, finally, now I can get that, whatever it is. But yes, I think, Pedro, you're right. They need to be a little bit cautious, a bit thoughtful, and see how things pan out. And I want to say this, the court is no longer as fussy about the property in which the children live. Like you'll fill in a form and they say, how are the children's housing? And you normally say something like, children they share a room or they have a room each and they've got all modern conveniences. We used to say they've got phone, refrigeration, all that. Everyone has those nowadays. So if you end up, as several of my clients did in the past, living on a granny flat on your parents' property or in a shouse, they call them here, a shed house. And when you hear that word, you think, oh, hang on, but I've seen photos and it's an option and it's a sensible option for people on their own with kids to not a tent, but something modest.
Yeah, we recommend everyone probably after settlement, before settlement, whenever you can, is to read a book. The one I always recommend is the Barefoot Investor. It really helps with budgeting, with how to structure your finances. Every time we see a client come in, I know exactly who have read that book and who hasn't because of the way they structure their finances. So it's a really great book to start. Very few financial planners will deal in depth with your, I guess, budgeting and your how to structure your finances and all that. We deal with more complex scenarios, but obviously every case is different. But if you you can do your own, like generally you can just read. Definitely, I would encourage you to read that book or any information out there on how to structure your finances.
That plays beautifully into the question I was going to ask. And is how can people who are renting or living in their parents' house or out the back get themselves back into that home ownership if that's what they really want, because it does matter to Aussies. I think it really does matter to us, because I think the one thing I wanted to know was I owned a house that the kids could live in, and if everything went to crap, we'd still be in a house. Like, even if it's partly falling down, it's still a house and no one could take that from us. And I know that's what a lot of, particularly mothers who've been through things that are horrible, that's all they care about, just a place that they can call their sanctuary. So whilst people might be listening today and they can't do that yet and they're renting, Pedro, so you really strongly recommend the Barefoot Investor to read, to follow.
I agree. The first thing is either that book or any information that is free online. There's a lot of noise out there. So there's a lot of influencers. There's a lot of people explaining to you how to buy your first home, and there's a lot of free information out there. The first thing I would challenge is make sure that the person who's giving the information has no vested interest in you doing something. So obviously, if I'm selling you an investment property, that this is how you're going to get it, I have a vested interest in you doing so. So for example, a book has no vested interest in you doing anything. So that kind of helps with this sincerity of who's helping you to do what. So first is probably read a book or have some sort of structured finances, then most likely get a financial planner to do a plan. Because what we do is we do financial modeling into your assets, your income, your expenses, and project your money into the future and tell you honestly to your face, you cannot buy a home in this lifetime, or yes, you can. This is the time, and just be very abrupt how to tell you, because sometimes it is impossible. Sometimes we say there's too much risk involved. You will be better off by renting your entire life and saving the money here and here, depending on your age. Sometimes we have great news at age X. I've done this so many times that people say, I've never thought I would be able to buy a home. And I think it was last month, we got someone in their 60s buy their first home. And it was a really great strategy. We did a combination of a broker and ourselves and her. She has a very well-structured finances. And we took her from, I think we started with her 2-3 years ago. And we said, in 3 years, this is when, and this is how, and this is the amount you have a property for yourself. And it's a great story. We love, beyond the monetary reward we get, is those moments where they said, you have changed my life, and I'm like, I can die happy now. It's fantastic. I do this job because I genuinely love those interactions with the faces that you can see someone so lost, and when you tell them you can now buy a home, it is the best reward we can get.
That's huge.
And
I think there's real value to anyone listening, no matter what kind of property settlement you're dealing with, no matter how big it is or how small it is. If you can find someone to sit down with you, and if you can't afford it, do it yourself, to plan out every possible scenario. What are your options? What have your lawyers said with the housing situation? What's it going to cost you? Look at each scenario, create that little graph that Pedro is talking about that shows by this age, this is how much you'll be spending, etc. Have a look at all the scenarios and really think about it before you just emotionally jump to the decision of keeping the house or emotionally jump to getting the hell out of there, because there's so many things you need to think about. So if you can see a financial planner or an accountant or anybody else who's got some sort of money brain, because I don't, who likes spreadsheets because I don't, that's where you need to go. And if you can have someone like Pedro show you a spreadsheet, this is what your life will look like if you buy the house. This is what your life's going to look like if you sell the house. This is what your life's going to look like if you rent. That's great. It takes the fear away of your future. It gives you something to save for.
I just wanted to say, we really haven't covered the situation of buying your ex out and keeping the house. And it is, if you can and you want to do that, the court will usually allow you, particularly if you've got the children after the amendment of the law, because the court tends to keep the asset pool as big as it can. And if they can avoid you paying agents' fees for sale, they'll let you buy the house. So I don't want people to think they can never buy the house, because there's what I call the third draw factor if you keep the house. And that is, if you keep that house for yourself, and you want to get, I don't know, a screwdriver, or you want to go and get your hose outside and nozzles and all the little things.
Birthday candles.
Birthday candles, yeah. And so every time you go shopping, you might be buying a grater, you might be buying just all the sorts of things you don't realise you've accumulated over the years. And it makes your cost of living higher every week for, I would say, 2 years. If you do lose furniture, though, in the kerfuffle, just remember it was second-hand only. and you could buy a secondhand one on Facebook. Sorry.
I forgot to add the other risk of surgery, property surgery. It's you are relying on your income now. You don't have a backup. So if you are sick, injured, or unable to work and the income does not come to your household and you have accepted a liability that most likely is for 30 years, that is a commitment that you told to the bank, I'm going to come up with this money every month for 30 years or whatever the remainder of your contract. You must ensure that you have some sort of product that protects your income, a lump sum, whatever that may be. That's what I guess financial planners look at risk like it was the Matrix. Like I feel like Neo dodging bullets. It's like, well, if you dodge a bullet because you went into an accident, imagine you signed the contract or you signed the settlement a day after you had in a car crash and you cannot work after that. Those are risks, low as they may, are risks that you are accepting, but nowhere in that contract or in that settlement tells you that if you don't come up with the money, that the house will be removed. Because obviously in Australia, they're pretty flexible. They're pretty lenient. They give you the banks. The worst thing that the bank, or the last thing that bank wants is your home. I've seen that, but it's still a risk that you may have to sell the house because you cannot, by injury or an exterior force of your own, can basically sustain the house.
Speaking of banks there, Pedro, just a couple of questions to round it off, because we have really kind of covered a lot of scenarios, but what do banks usually look for and consider when someone's trying to apply for a loan after separation? Are there things people need to be aware of?
Yes. So number one, and again, I do not work for Equifax. I promise there are many other options out there to check your credit score. I just use Equifax, but check your credit score. That is basically the first thing a bank will do will be a check on your credit score. So if you have lower credit score, if your ex-partner has been dealing with you behind your back and you know that you director in a company that went under, or that the person has applied for so much credit, both of your names, your credit score has dropped. That's number one. Make sure you have a very good credit score. Second, the bank will see is your income. How long have you been employed for? Usually, if you have an income for 6 months, then they'll take that. So that's comfortable. If you're working part-time, you have to be mindful how little is too little. So you might be earning a lot, but the hours may not match. And if you're casual, that's also a worry for banks. Where you work also implies their risk monitoring. So if you work for mining, that's a very cyclical industry. So those are things so if you're white collar, very little, an accountant or something it will bystand the waves of a market cycle, then they deem you less risky. So where you work, how much you work, your credit score, even where you live increases your credit score. I realized that when I moved the other day, my credit scores went up because you said everyone around you always pay their bills. Like sick. I'm like, I love living here. And that's generally reason how much credit you apply in a very short period. So those are the things that bank.
Yeah. Does having children or paying child support affect your borrowing capacity?
Yes. Having children, having a dependence on you, paying alimony, or that's in America, so paying child support, and your credit cards. If you have credit cards, even if you have them paid, it's around 4 times their capacity. That will reduce your borrowing. So if you have a credit card for $10,000, on average, the bank will say, well, you can't borrow. If you could borrow 100, you can only borrow 60 now. So those are things that having credit cards under your name, personal loans, that also will reduce your borrowing capacity.
So, Mum, if people are going into mediation to negotiate and the ex may say, okay, you can keep the house, should they be going and finding out first if they can get a loan before they go to mediation? Like, is this the kind of stuff they should be doing before they even start negotiating?
Well, in a perfect world, yes, but it's very hard when you're dealing with abstract things. But yes, if you go and just do the free things online is a better way of doing it, I guess. Know that I suspect you'll have to go through a broker because they will fight harder for you. But boy, it's so unfair because if a person is paying child support, their borrowing capacity is diminished. If you are receiving child support, you don't get any benefit. Oh, you might not get it. They might not pay. So somewhere there's this big black hole. Yes.
That's not fair.
No.
It's a bit of a...
It is. It's a big black hole in their lending policies, because I think what it was is I think they're a bit behind the times in terms of child support, because most people are paying their child support obligations now, and it's managed through the child support agency if they're difficult. So it's not like just relying on largesse from a person. And the people who are calculating who pays child support, that they've got the message on that one, but they somehow, don't. So it doesn't help you much at all.
Right. So everybody's homework is to sit down and write out different future scenarios of all of these things if they haven't yet negotiated and got an agreement for property, I guess. And I am going to plug Pedro's website again for those free calculators and things, because coming from a person who doesn't like spreadsheets, they're doable and the budget is doable. And I am going to say, I'm going to plug Pedro here. He did Dancing with the Stars, which is for women's legal services in Queensland, and he raised so much money for them. So I know he's coming from a good place. He cares. He really actually cares. And he's giving his time here today to help everybody because he cares about this issue and none of us want to hear any of you becoming homeless or getting stuck in a situation you can't handle properly because you didn't see something coming. This is why we do this. And I know that Pedro comes from that same place. This is why Pedro does it. So apparently a really good dancer. I've seen videos. So if anyone wants to have a look, it'll be on the Women's Legal website, Women's Legal Services, that offer free legal services to people who are in need as well. So again, Pedro, you're amazing. I'll put your website in the link for the free calculators everybody can use. Is there anything you wanted to share? Last words of wisdom, Pedro?
First, don't look at my video dancing. That's one. It is in my blood. I do have to agree. It is in my blood. It's not that I'm better than anybody. No, I'm just another South American with music in my veins. No, but in all honesty, I don't know. I was being brought up that the more you give, the more somehow you get back. It has been an absolutely motto of my whole life. And I genuinely put those calculators there, not for our own doing or for wanting to any businesses, because I wish all of those calculators were in the one spot. Every time I talk to clients, I went to different websites to pick different calculators, and it was really hard for me to keep track. And that's why we put them all in the one place. Just genuine, free. You don't need to sign up to anything. Just go in there, have a look, and use as many as you want. They are there for anybody to use. So I feel that if I was in a situation when I have to separate from my partner, I would make informed decisions. And the word informed comes from knowledge. I would grab as much knowledge as I can, especially that's a lot of free stuff out there, to inform myself in which decision should I be making. Then if it's way outside my scope, is way outside my understanding, then try to involve a third party that is a specialist in the area. So I think that's my only thing that I want the listeners to do is make an informed decision, inform yourself, educate yourself. And if it's way outside your scope, go and reach to someone who can help you.
And Mum, what are we embroidering on a cushion today for anyone who's listening to this one?
It's better, I think it's better to come to terms with selling your home during the settlement or as part of the property settlement than to realise it when you're under economic stress and have to bear the costs yourself.
Okay.
So be careful.
That's going to have to be one of those long cushions.
It might be a banner.
Yeah. A banner. But yeah, I think that's right. And if you are still wanting to explore more about this, we've got an episode on selling your house and what to consider with the divorce personality types. We've got an episode on keeping the house and also out of the box ideas to keep the house. And if you'd like to listen to any of the Pedro episodes we've done in the past, there's the financial abuse one and superannuation ones and weapons of tax destruction one. We will put all of that in the show notes as well.
And if you've got any benefit out of our YouTube, would you please and maybe subscribe, because that's the way you can get us to helping other people who may not know we're doing this for all of you. So pay it forward.
Awesome. All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Pedro. You're always welcome. We might have you on one of our member Q&As soon.
Yes.
So any of our listeners who are members can ask you some questions. And thank you, Mum, for your time again. And we will see you all back here next week.
Thank you, Laura. Bye-bye, Pedro.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
If you found this podcast helpful, we'd love it if you could rate, review, and subscribe. By doing so, you are spreading the word to help someone else just like you. Lynn would like to remind you that this podcast is general advice only, and you should always get legal advice in relation to your particular situation. And remember that the Australian laws may have changed since recording.